Hey guys, what's going on? Today I'm going to be reacting to Gravity's top 50 rankings. It's just kind of a spontaneous idea I had. I do plan on reacting to other uh, scouts ranking lists like Craig Button's list and all the other major scouts. I will be going over their lists, comparing them, analyzing them, maybe doing a little bit of statistical analysis later. But Gravity just released his top 50 list, and I thought it would be pretty interesting to watch it and see where I agree with him, where I disagree with him. Now, I have actually already watched this video, but I didn't take notes or anything, so I wasn't anticipating doing a video on it at that point. And so I'm not really entirely certain uh, how much I'm going to agree with him. I do remember at least one guy in particular, I'm pretty sure I think he has too low. Um, but yeah, with that, let's just get into it. I did skip his intro here pretty much, so should be getting right into number 50.
Now, we haven't released one of these prospect rankings since
Hmm.
December, and a lot
Oh,
has
okay,
changed
not quite.
since then, and a lot of work has gone into the list as well. So hit that like button if you
Hopefully
haven't
the
already, and
audio
we'll also
mix
have some honorable
is
mentions
just
on the side
fine.
before we get into this top 50. But you know what? Without further ado, let's move on to the top 50 prospects in the 20.
Okay, actually, really quick, I can talk about these honorable mentions. Goucher at 51, that seems pretty low for him, to be honest. David Goyette at 52, I don't have a problem with that. Noah Warren at 53, that's kind of high for him. And then Adam Ingram at 54 is fine for me. Moldenhauer is not a guy I've seen a lot of this year, so I can't really comment too much on that one. And there might be a few guys that he goes over that I haven't seen too much, so we'll just have to see.
2022 NHL draft. And starting things off at number 50, I got Seattle Thunderbirds forward Jordan Gustafsson, who, in my opinion, will be a solid third line, fourth line defensive and two-way forward. Has some good speed to him, has some good overall tools, but I see him being a solid third liner who just gets the job done, really makes life difficult in the.
Yeah, I mean, number 50 for Gustafsson, I think that's pretty fair. He's pretty much a second round guy for me. I do like how he puts all of the numbers and everything on the screen. That is something that I need to learn how to do. But quite frankly, I'm a little bit lazy. But I will figure out how to do that. Maybe I will incorporate that into videos later. Although I do have a different style, so it's not exactly my style, but having it on screen is definitely
The
useful.
defensive zone. Going on to number 49, I have Panofimis of the Niagara Ice Dogs. He's an
Okay, this
efficient,
is a guy
solid
that
player,
I
has good
haven't really
tools
seen.
overall, and I love his shot and passing
I mean, I've
combo.
sure I've
He's a
seen
player,
him,
though, that I
but I
think can
haven't
add some explosiveness
specifically
and some
been
better
looking for him.
anticipation when the puck's not on his stick. But I think overall he could be a really consistent and good fourth-line centerman. Next, I'm moving to number 48, and one of the biggest wild cards of this draft in Kamloops Blazers forward Matthias Semenov. Now, to me, Semenov has really interesting potential, but the main gripe I have of him is his skating. His form is wacky, his explosiveness is just not there, and although he knows where to be, he is in the right positions most of the time. I feel like that skating holds him back from truly unlocking his best form. Fantastic passing ability, his hockey sense is amazing, but again, I feel like if he adds some more skating to him, that's really the only thing keeping him back from a great middle six role in the NHL.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a pretty fair analysis of Semenov. His skating is an issue. I think he's perhaps a little bit. This is kind of interesting because I think perhaps he is a little bit harsh on him here, but at the same time he has him ranked at 48, which is a lot higher than I have him ranked. So uh, I don't know. That is a bit high for him. Like you said, the skating is an issue, and that is my biggest thing with prospects. It's slightly less important for forwards. If a forward is like skilled enough or like plays the right style of game, then their skating doesn't necessarily have to be that great. Think of guys like Jason Robertson and like Joe Pavelski. Those guys are guys that got drafted where they did largely because of their skating. I mean, Pavelski was like a seventh round pick, I think, but Robertson was drafted 38th overall, I think, and it largely because a lot of scouts were really concerned about his skating, and his skating isn't really that great either in the NHL. But obviously, he plays a style of game where it works for him. He's found a way to produce at the NHL level. Semenov is an undersized forward a bit. He is smaller than Robertson too, so Robertson's size kind of helps him out a little bit. But I don't know. 48 does seem pretty high for Semenov.
Then going on to number 47, we're going to go to a player that shares a name with another high-profile NHL
Okay,
player.
Jack
Not
Hughes is
Jack
going to come
Hughes,
here.
but Elias Petterson. Another Swedish player,
Okay,
this time
not
though on
Jack
the
Hughes.
defensive side of things, is one of my quieter players in this draft class, but in my opinion, I think he'll be a really consistent and longevity defenseman in the NHL. Very solid, I think, in a bottom pairing role. He's going to be great defensively, knowing where to be. His skating is pretty great for his age and pretty great for his frame. And at 6'2", I think he's going to be a solid and consistent bottom pairing guy that you won't have to worry about too much at the NHL level. Going on.
Yeah, with Elias Pettersson, the main concern with him is not really anything about his game in particular. It's just his offensive upside. So that is pretty common for defenders that are pretty consistent, pretty NHL projectable, but they don't have a lot of offensive upside potential. Those guys tend to go in the second round. The most notable example I could think of as a Sharks fan is Mario Ferraro. They got him at, I believe, 44th overall. Really solid guy that they liked, but didn't have a lot of offensive potential. I kind of see that with Pettersson, and as Graviteh mentioned, his skating is really good. Combined with his size, that is really the key foundations for being a solid defensive defenseman, at least in the NHL.
That's number 46, almost the complete opposite of Elias Pettersson. I have defenseman Ty Nelson. To me, Nelson has become one of the most frustrating players of this draft. I have him a lot higher at the beginning of the year, and I was trying to make excuses for him, but as the year has gone by, and especially throughout the OHL, to me, he's just such a weird player to watch and such a frustrating player to watch. So many simple plays that could be made by him are just thrown away for dumping and chasing and just really not using his strengths to his advantage. He's a player that does have some really great skating, really great tools, but I don't see him unlocking it enough. If he does and takes that next step, he's a first round talent, but right now I have him outside of that. Next.
Yeah, okay, so I'm just now realizing that this video is going to be super long because his video is 36 minutes and I'm commenting on like every player. But yeah, with Ty Nelson, he kind of hit the nail on the head there again for me. His decision making is at times just really questionable, especially the dump and chase thing, where he'll dump it when there isn't really a reason to. And I hate dump and chase hockey in general, so dumping it when there's no need to is like extremely frustrating. And I think potentially that is the system. His coaches are telling him to dump and chase, to play dump and chase style hockey. That is kind of North Bay's style in general. So I'm not. It makes it kind of a tough read for me because I don't want to knock him too hard because of that, because I do feel like it's a system thing. But at the same time, you can only really judge him for how he's playing on the ice, and how he's playing on the ice isn't really that great. So uh, I don't really have too much of a problem with the ranking. I'm not entirely certain exactly where I have him, but second round in general seems pretty fair for him.
Up at number 45 is Isaiah George, big-time defenseman at 6'1", but also has a much bigger style of game to him. One of the better defensive defensemen of this draft, in my opinion, and his skating is pretty great too. Although I don't think he has too much potential, will likely, alongside Elias Pettersson, be a pretty great bottom pairing guy. He'll be a gel guy and will be exactly what you're getting in a player like that. Next up at number.
Yeah, pretty similar to Elias Pettersson, I guess, in terms of their NHL projectability. Another guy that I don't see has a lot of offensive upside. I pretty much agree with Gravity's description here. Although one thing I will say is he keeps characterizing these guys as bottom pairing defensemen, and generally speaking, that is pretty fair. But these are players whose upside I think is a bit higher than that because you don't have to have a lot of offense to play in a top four, especially if your defensive partner is like a high octane offensive guy. So, say for example, again going with the Sharks, if you're Eric Carlson, your defensive partner is you're probably going to want your defensive partner to be somebody who is defensively responsible, who can play a bit physical, especially if they want to protect other players on the ice. I mean, Carlson isn't that small, but there are a lot of undersized offensive defensemen in this draft class in particular. So if you're thinking about pairing guys together and you get a small undersized defenseman, a guy like George could be a good guy to pair on, say, your second pair with an offensive guy as somebody who can cover for their mistakes and protect them if the other team is trying to go after your smaller guys.
Number 44, I got Cameron Lund out of the USHL. He's one of the more underrated players of this draft, one of the more clean and efficient players out there. Nothing too fancy to his game, and although I do think that skating can take a next step, at the same time, he has great physical traits already, knows where to be at the right times, and at 6'2", I think will be a stylized NHL player and a ready one in a bottom 6 one day. But next,
Yeah, I pretty much agree that Lund is underrated because he's a guy that I haven't really watched, haven't been paying that much attention to either. I am kind of guilty of that, so I don't have really much of an opinion on him, although I could agree that he is underrated.
moving on to number 43, and one of my hotter takes of this top 50. At number 43, I have Swedish defenseman Elias Petterson. Now, a lot of people have soured on him. I still think of him as a top 50 prospect. His tools are absolutely elite. His skating is fantastic, and I think his defensive structure is brilliant. The problem is, especially on the rush and in the offensive zone, some of the decision-making can be flat out horrible. And if you remember, going back to last year, a lot of this profile starts to sound like Simone Edvinson. And to me, Petterson is kind of a lesser version of that. Might not be as elite, might not be as talented, but still has a lot of great tools. And if you're able to unlock that brain, there's so much potential to be had. Next up,
Yeah, so the only thing I would really caution there is comparing him to Evanson. Generally speaking, I try to be careful when comparing guys to NHL players, or in this case, other prospects that are pretty highly touted. Um, you kind of get a lot of hype around players when there isn't necessarily that much hype there to be had. Sally Monson is not a guy that I think is like the next Evanson. Um, so yeah.
At number 42, we're going to go to German forward Julian Lutz, a player that was injured throughout most of the first half and then came back and has played pretty well in the DEL, in my opinion, brings some fantastic physical strength, and with his speed at 6'2", to me, this is a player that could be a really solid and really good middle six player and could even max out as a second line player that you have on a power play and really work with offensively.
Yeah, that is pretty high for Lutz, but I do quite like it. I might be slightly less high on him than he is here, but I did have him in my video on underrated players, I do believe.
Going on to number 41, and next up I have Sam Rinzel, USA defenseman out of the USHL. One of the more frustrating defensemen on this list for the same
Okay, Renzel is not a player I've seen at all this year, just to be fair.
time if you're able to unlock those tools and that skating especially, this is a guy that could be a solid physical, solid and good two-way defenseman at the NHL level. The problem is his defensive work is absolutely horrendous. At 6'3", the guy cannot cover anybody and gets blown away way too much for just how good of a skater he can be. To me, there's potential to be unlocked there, but also again, some of the decision making and some of the edge work does need work. But going on to number 40 and going on outside of the first 10 picks. Moving on to number 40, I got one of my favorite players of this draft in Devin Kaplan. Now, I'm pretty high on Kaplan for a multitude of reasons. His 6'3" frame really complements his offensive skills, and he's a very dynamic, very concise, and very consistent player in the offensive zone. Gets great results in his transition play, is amazing. Loves to work within the neutral zone and prove and push play. The problem is, I think some explosiveness is needed, and I also think his edge work is a little bit raw, but at the same time, if you were able to unlock him, I could see a great and solid and physical middle six player. Next up, though,
Yeah, so Kaplan is a guy that I have seen, but not because I was specifically watching him. I was watching some of his teammates. Um, and yeah, not really a guy that I ever got around to taking notes on, but not a player that really stood out to me in a crazy way. But you know, that program is obviously stacked with a lot of other players, so it's kind of hard to judge players that you aren't specifically watching for. So high second round pick for him seems pretty fair based on what I've seen from other scouts.
at number 39, we're going to go to Christian Kyaru, joining Kairu's younger brother of the Erie Otters. To me, there's a lot to like with Kyaru. His offensive game is sublime. Such an interesting and creative player in the offensive zone. Loves to push play and loves to get into high danger areas, as well as the defense, where I feel like there's some raw tools that can be unlocked. He's not a pure offensive defenseman. I think there is some tools to work with there, and you combine that with his shooting, with his pace of play. To me, there's a lot to like there, and a pretty solid early bet in the second round. Next up,
Okay, so he might be overstating his defensive impact a little bit there, in my opinion. But I love Christian Kyaru. I do have him slightly higher than this, but a lot of people have him lower than this. I think I have him just into my first round right now. So I love to see him this high.
number 38, I'm going to go to one of the more refined players, in my opinion, of this draft, and Adam Secura, coming out of Slovakia, who's been really interesting this year. One of the better defensive skaters, I would say, of this draft. Loves to correct play and loves to get away from opposition, control it, and with his physical stature and size, even though he is 5'10", he's a player that loves to get in the dirty areas, loves to play along the boards, and control pace once again. Good possession player, and although I think there is some work to be done in terms of his decision-making in the neutral zone, he's a player that has great positioning, and I think could be a really solid middle six defensive forward at the next level. Now going
Okay, so all I will say about that one is that Graviteh is a Scouting fan confirmed.
on to number 37, though, and Owen Beck. To me, the biggest problem with Beck is just there's not that much potential in him. I feel like his pace of play is a little bit unrefined, but at the same time, I do like his skating quite a bit, and I do like his overall hockey sense and the decision-making. Very effective and efficient player in the offensive zone. I don't think he's going to push the needle too much, but as a third-line centerman, I think alongside of lines like Lars Eller, he's going to be good enough and solid and consistent on a winning team. But now moving
Yeah, I don't really like Owen Beck that much. Not a guy that I watched a ton of either, but kind of like Grav said there, he's not a guy that really pushes the needle, I guess, in his words. Just I don't think there's that much skill there. He might be a little bit generous with his projections on these guys. I do think he's more of a bottom six forward. Of course, that could still be a third line center role. But the third line center is kind of an underrated position in the NHL. It's a really, really important position to have. One, because if one of your top two centers gets injured, that is generally going to be the next guy that takes a much bigger role. And yeah, so I don't know. I don't know that Owen Beck exactly has what it takes to fill that role specifically, but a bottom six forward, sure. I wouldn't have him quite as high as this. I have him more of as like a mid to late second rounder.
moving on to number 36, talking about great potential in the future for a winning team. Going on number 36, I'm going to go to Jack Hughes 2.0. Not 2019 Jack Hughes, 2022 Jack Hughes, which is a much different player. When it comes to Jack Hughes, I think he's one of the more underrated and consistent players of this draft. The name of the game for me with him is just consistency and raw work ethic. He's a player that, as a third-line centerman, I think is going to be absolutely amazing in that role going in the future on faceoffs with the leadership he provides and just the example that he exudes. He's such a consistent and solid player and so much fun to watch. But now
Yeah, Hughes unfortunately is another player that I didn't really get to see this year. Watching NCAA games is not something that I is like commonly out there. So if you know where to get those games legally, legitimately, leave it in the comments. I'd love to be able to watch some of these guys. It's pretty rare though for a prospect to come out of the NCAA. So from what I hear, Hughes is fine. Rankings on him are kind of all over the place, but that is common for a lot of guys in this draft class.
moving on to number 35, and speaking of fun to watch, let's go on to one of the biggest wild cards, one of the hardest players to project in this NHL draft, in Ivan Miuroshachenko. Now, even before he got Hodgkin's lymphoma, there was a lot of question marks surrounding him and his really lack of production throughout the year. In 2021, he had a lot of different places where he was producing exceedingly well and was looked at going into this draft class as one of the top 5, top 10 players available. This year, it didn't really all come together, but I still think the tools are there. His puck handling is great. His skating can really be fantastic in key moments. And to me, if he's able to revive some of that hockey sense that he still has in him, to me, he's a player that could be a top 6 forward, but is definitely one of the bigger boomer bust prospects of this draft class.
35 is pretty low for Miuroshachenko, in my opinion. I have him ranked significantly higher than that. I just think his puck skills, his skating, his scoring touch, like, I know I'm not going too much in depth on here, on any of these players because I do want to keep this video as short as possible because I'm sure it's going to be a very long one. But yeah, Miroshnichenko is way higher on my board.
Now, talking about boomer bust, let's go on number 34 and one of the most interesting and electrifying defensemen of this draft class in Lane Hutson. Now, he is 5'8", and that's going to be a big detractor for some people. But at the same time, I still love a lot of the tools when it comes to Hutson. Although the physical traits aren't there for a player that size, his skating is very good, and it's honestly, in some ways, getting better and better as time goes on. His puck handling is elite, his passing game is fantastic, and his vision is one of the best among defensemen in this draft. To me, there's a lot of pace that Hutson brings, and going to Boston University, I think this is a player that can get refined a lot, and hopefully the next level will be able to push play a lot better with the physicality around him. Now going on.
Yeah, so Hudson at 34 is perfectly fine. I have him like at the tail end of my first round. The offense is there. He could be one of the best offensive defensemen to come out of this draft class. I've made the comparison to Torrey Krug in a previous video, and I will stand by that. Not necessarily going to be super impactful defensively, but in terms of guys that can run a top power play efficiently, I think he's one of them, and there's not a lot of those guys in this draft class.
That's number 33. We're going to go to another player from the USDP in Isaac Howard. He's a player that I think needs a lot to get to the next.
This is really low for Isaac Howard, in my opinion. It'll be interesting to see what he has to say about him.
Next level. I think his physical traits aren't quite there yet, and I think going against harder competition is going to be an adjustment for him, and that defensive game is really nowhere to be seen. But at the same time, that transitional play that he has, that great play in the offensive zone that he's able to provide, he loves to create space, loves to get in deep, and with his shot, has so much potential, I think, in the next level as a power play forward. Probably going to be a solid third-line power play forward who gets around 40 points a year and is just solid every single time. But now.
Okay, so yes, he's undersized, but he's not exactly that small. Uh, his offensive upside, I think, is a lot higher than that. His shot is really good. His playmaking is really solid. I don't see him. If he works, he's going to be a top 6 forward. I will agree his defensive game is pretty bad, but he's not a guy that I see as a third line power play specialist. He, like, that is potentially, I don't want to say his floor, but that is like a suboptimal outcome for him, in my opinion. I see him more of as a bona fide top 6 guy, and I guess that's going to be the main difference in our rankings.
Let's move on to the first prospect in the first round rankings at number 32. And let's go on first things first to Swedish defenseman Matthias Havelid. Now, to me, Havelid has a lot of great potential to unlock. At his frame, though, at 5'10", there is some questions with his physical traits. I think he'll definitely need to step up his frame and his posture at the next level. And I do think his skating as well with his edge work can be a little bit better, and his explosiveness too. But at the same time, he has such a solid IQ to him, knows where to be and knows where to pass to, and his passing and offensive game is really at a high level. I could see him being a top 4 power play quarterback, but there is still some pretty big question marks there. But going on to number 31, going to a player that doesn't have many question marks. Next up, I have from the USDP, Jimmy Snuggerud. Now, he is just barely worth a first-round pick, in my opinion, because of what he's able to do on a consistent overall basis. He's not going to be an elite, amazing player, but on a third line role as a checking defensive player, he is going to be amazing. On a penalty kill one day, he's going to make lives so difficult for opposing offenses with his stick reach, with his overall ability, with his skating. This is a player that'll really be a defensive stalwart, and his offense ain't bad either. His transition game is solid, and I do think his passing game, there's a lot to unlock there, but he'll be a fantastic two-way forward at the next level. But now.
So Havilland, not a guy that I really have seen much of the season, so I can't comment too much on him. Snuggerud is a guy I mostly agree with. I do have him ranked slightly lower. He's in my second round, like early second round. But yeah, I think he'll be a pretty solid bottom 6 forward who is kind of a defensive specialist. Not sure how much offense he's going to provide. It sounds like Gravity's a little bit more optimistic in terms of his offense than I am, but he could be a guy that ends up playing all in all situations. Could be a staple on your penalty kill and could also maybe get some second power play time.
Now going on to number 30, and one of the prospects I've changed my mind about the most over the course of the year. At number 30, I have USDP defenseman Ryan Chesley. Now, if you asked me early in the year what I thought about Chesley, I would have said he was nowhere near first round caliber. But as I was beginning to watch more of him, especially as the World Juniors came around and then afterwards, to me, I started to see exactly the hype that Chesley does bring. At 6 foot, his skating is very good. And as a defenseman, there's a lot of edge work there and a lot of great play that is on a consistent basis there. I do think there is some question marks with his transition game, especially when it comes to his decision making there. But at the same time, defensively, I think there's a lot of tools there, and he did provide a lot more of an offensive game as the year went on, especially with his passing and overall quickness in making decisions. Although sometimes it can be pretty bad. At the same time, as a defensive two-way defenseman, I think there is potential to be had with Ryan Chesley, especially with his solid skating. But if we're going to be talking about solid skating, let's go on to one of the best skaters of this draft. At number 29, I have Russian defenseman Vladimir Grudinan. Now, Grudinan became quickly one of my favorite players to watch, one of the best and most agile and mobile defensemen of this draft, if not the most mobile and agile. He's a player that just with his edge work and quickness can easily evade opposing forecheckers and get away from pressure so easily. He's a guy that I do also like his offensive potential, especially on a power play. His puck handling is amazing and also one of the better puck handlers of this draft. You combine that with his skating, and I think there's a really offensive and really interesting rush player here, but I do think those physical traits and how he gets knocked off pucks too easily could also keep him from reaching that NHL level.
So, totally agree with Grudinan's skating. He is, in my opinion, the best skater amongst defensemen in this draft class, and maybe even the best skater in general in this draft class. And I also see him as a guy who could be a really efficient puck carrier in transition, especially on the power play, which is really valuable. And I don't think there's a lot of defensemen in this class in particular that are good at doing that. So that's a trait that I value a lot. And he is undersized, but I think Gravity here is kind of overstating how easily he gets beaten off the puck because yes, he does get beaten in one-on-one physical battles, but he is a very fierce competitor and he will hold his ground pretty well. He will often lose battles that you kind of expect him to lose, but it is a lot tougher than you would expect when he's going up against, say, like a 6'2 guy who has like 40 pounds on him. He does fight pretty well and he never gives up on a play. So I don't think he's that easy to beat off the puck at all, especially considering his size. So if he can get a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, then I don't think that's going to be too much of an issue for him at the NHL level, and that I'm guessing is why I have him ranked quite a bit higher on my board.
Pretty big boomer bust guy as well. But now moving on to number 28 and one of the more
Okay, also, I don't really see him as a boomer bust guy.
simple players of this draft. At number 28, I have Yuri Kulich, who just screams to me fantastic third line centerman. Face-off ability is great. His skating and edge work is fantastic, especially when starting play and getting out of those face-offs. His shooting is pretty great too, and I think his shot is very underrated. This is a player that, as a third line scoring centerman, I think can do a lot, and his smarts as well. Even though they do have a ways to go, I think they're also on the right level at the pro leagues to where he's a guy that can adapt and really make play right in the NHL level. Now going on to number 27,
Another scouting guy right there.
huge wild card in this draft, in Danily Yurov. Now, he's a player that might not transition to North America for a while, which I think will scare quite a few people, and rightfully so. And he barely played this year. Played some of the MHL, and when he was in the KHL, played like 2 minutes a game if he was lucky. So there wasn't much to really go off of, but at the same time, his tools are absolutely top tier. If we're just going off talent, if we're just going off potential, Yurov should probably be in the top 20, but I do think some of the physical traits that he doesn't have and some of the consistency issues he has does keep me from really loving this player. Next, I'm
Okay, so with Yurov, I don't really think his physicality is that much of an issue, at least in terms of his size. You could always coach a player into being more physical, but you can't coach a player to get taller. And his size, he's not huge, but he's not small either. Like he's perfectly fine. And where was I going with this? Yeah, so his skill though, I think is too hot, is too good to have him that low. I understand the worries about him playing in Russia and not getting minutes in the KHL, especially considering everything that's going on with Russia right now. And he could be a guy that plays in Russia for the next 5 or 6 years. But my philosophy is that that doesn't really play a role in where I actually rank players. I generally try to rank players in terms of who's the most skilled player that I would draft to who is the least skilled player I would draft. Now, it's obviously more complicated than that because some guys have a lot of skill, but they have serious flaws that kind of negate that to an extent. But Yurov's skill to me is too high to have him this low.
Number 26, we're going to go to another USDP defenseman here. Next up, though, I have Seamus Casey. One of the more electrifying defensemen of this draft, especially with his
It seems
transition
pretty high
game.
for
But
Casey.
he's a player that, with his amazing edge work and solid puck handling, can dangle out players so easily and really into the defensive zone, put possession on his team throughout the entire shift. He's a guy that in the offensive zone as well has a great work ethic, really around the boards, can skate around opposing forwards so easily, and his ability to get pucks to the slot and create high danger chances is one of the best among this draft. Though on defense, he does get knocked off the puck a little bit too much for my liking, and at 5'10", those physical and defensive traits do still need to take a big step before they're NHL quality. But moving.
Okay, so Casey's skating to me is a pretty serious issue, and that is the main weakness in his game. I'm a little bit surprised that he didn't mention that. It sounds like he thought his skating was actually positive, at least in certain situations. And I don't see that at all. Granted, my channel is specifically focused just on prospects, and that's not the case with Gravity, so I, don't want to knock him too much for that. And of course, you're always open to, or I am always open to differing opinions. But I will also say that Casey is kind of a boomer bust guy for me because the skating is an issue and the size. If when you're undersized, your skating has to be like really, really good to make it in the NHL, and Casey isn't there yet. So as it is now, he is not a guy that would play in the NHL. He has to make his skating better. So he's kind of either he does or he doesn't. So he either makes it or he doesn't. That's my opinion. But yeah, could be a steal in this draft class. 26 is pretty high for him. It'll be interesting to see exactly where he gets drafted because he's such a boomer bust guy. Could be one of those rare guys who has a lot of offensive potential who falls into the second round, and then somebody could potentially be getting really great value.
On to number 25, going into another interesting defenseman here. Next up from the Swift Current Broncos, I have Owen Pickering. Now, Pickering, in terms of raw tools, also has a lot to love. His physical traits are amazing, and at 6'5", I think his size is a really big part of his game in more ways than one. Although I do think his skating is fine and his mobility is pretty solid, at the same time, I do think his puck handling can definitely take that next step, and if it doesn't, I feel like he will be less of an offensive defenseman and more of a bottom pairing transitional player, but at the same time, a valuable, potentially bottom six player, if not top four guy, that if he's able to unlock that skating, can do way more than he does.
Yeah, so we kind of hit the nail on the head here with Pickering. He is big and his skating is pretty good. Um, Other than that, there's not like a ton of like puck skills there. He is like a fine volume passer, doesn't create a ton of high danger chances, but when you have a guy that's big who skates as well as he does, now he's not like some crazy elite skater, but he is quite mobile for a guy of his size. That is just the foundations of a really strong defenseman. Not necessarily a guy who puts up a ton of points in the NHL, but could be a top four guy who eats up a lot of tough minutes.
Already. Now going on to number 24 and going to Russian forward Gleb Trikuzov, who's one of the more dynamic, and I think dynamic is the best word to describe Trikuzov in this draft, is one of the most interesting and smart
This is too low
IQ
for Trikazov.
offensive players, knows how to push play, knows where to be, and loves to get pucks to high danger areas. He's going to be a player that if he gets better sample size and is a little bit more accustomed to the men's game and men's maturity, I think he's a player that will do very well at the next level and could even be as good as a top 6 forward. Now going on to number 23.
Yeah, so the thing with Trikazov is he will be a top six forward, or he probably won't play in the NHL. I mean, he could play with. I could kind of see him play a bottom six role, but that is only if his defense gets like a lot better. He's an offensive specialist, and he's almost he's weird. He's almost like a power forward with like a ton of skill as well. He's just one of the highest end guys in terms of forwards and offense. In fact, he's one of the top guys in terms of skaters in general, in terms of creating offense. He was absolutely electric in the NHL playoffs this year. Really carried his team as far as they went in the playoffs. And yeah, so he is absolutely a top six guy. One of the few guys, in fact, that I think could actually be a bona fide top line winger in this draft class, maybe even a centerman. Um, well, again, his defense would have to improve a lot to be a top a top line centerman, but it's not impossible. You can coach that into players potentially. Some players are more coachable than others, and quite frankly, he is too good for the MHL. So next year, hopefully, he will be playing in the KHL and showing what he can do against men.
Though, and one of the bigger players of this draft in size and in game in Leon Bichelle. One of my favorite defensemen of this draft, and to me, there's so much potential to be unlocked here. One of the hardest hitting defensemen of this draft, if not the hardest, and to me, he has the best potential as a physical, dominant defenseman, and I do think there is some offense to be had there. His shot is great, and his skating is really solid for a 6'5" defenseman, and that's why I'm so high on him. He's not just this burling, hitting guy. He can do so much more, and at the NHL level, he's going to be a great prototype of the next era of defenseman, which I think is key. Going on to number 22, though, next up I have Swedish defenseman Callie Odelis. Now, when it comes to Callie, there is some big things there. I think his skating is fantastic, and his physical traits at 6 foot are really projected, I think, going to the next level to be consistent at the NHL level, but I do feel like, as well, some of the shooting is an issue. He takes some weird chances, and I do feel like with him, there is some refinement to be made, but there is potential there, and I think he could be a top 4 D-man. Now, going from two defensive defensemen, let's move on to one of the bigger offensive defensemen of this draft, maybe the most interesting and fun to watch offensive defenseman of this draft, in Kevin Korchinski of the Seattle Thunderbirds. To me, he's one of the best transitional players, period, of this draft. Loves to get up and play and loves to create plays and pace all by himself. He's got it with his puck handling and great passing ability, has great potential there, but I do think the defensive game does kind of blow him by a little bit. At 6'2", there is potential there, but I do also think his skating isn't good enough to keep a hold of the best forwards going against him defensively, and I do think there is some more refinement that does need to be made, but at the same time, his transition game is so good that you might as well take a chance inside the top 25. Then
Okay, so 21 does seem pretty low for Korchinski for me, and the two Swedish guys, I haven't seen too much of them to really comment on them. But Korchinski is my third ranked defenseman in this class, and it does seem like he has a lot more defensemen in the first round than I do. So to have him this low is a bit interesting. I don't think his skating is really that much of an issue. To me, the biggest issue with Korchinski is his decision making. He can oftentimes just make really boneheaded decisions, which make him look worse defensively, I would say, than he is. Because, when sometimes if you try to make a dumb pass and gets intercepted, then that isn't really, and let's say it leads to like a break and then they score on it. That isn't really your defense being bad. It's your decision making. Like you made a poor decision that led to that chance. It wasn't like you got beat off the puck or dangled or something like that. Um, But yeah, the offensive upside is there, and the skating I think is fine. And I don't think the defense game is that bad either. So 21 seems kind of low for him.
Going on to number 20, and the first forward and first player inside my top 20. At number 20, I have Slovakian forward Filip Mesar. Now, to me, Mesar has great traits and some of the best skating and puck handling abilities of this draft. Loves to get pucks in the slot and loves to create plays all by himself. But I do think the physical game, even though he is playing in Slovakia, is pretty horrendous. He gets knocked off pucks way too easily, and along the boards can get kind of manhandled way too consistently. But I do think at the next level, if he's able to provide some muscle and able to get a lot better under his feet, there's a fantastic top 6 power play offensive player here. But now,
Yeah, so I would say that Mashar is pretty much one of the more underrated players in this draft class. So to see him at 20, I think that's pretty similar to where I have him. So that's good. That's good to me.
at 19, we're going to go to one of the more interesting players and defensemen of this draft from the Moose Jaw Warriors in Denton Mateychuk. Now, to me, he's been dominant, he's been amazing, and he's been so good in the WHL. But at the same time, some of the things he is doing and getting away with, I don't think are going to be all too easy at the pro level, even the NHL level for one. To me, this is a player that will have to still kind of change their offensive game quite a bit. And for a more offensive defenseman like Mateychuk, a more transitional defenseman like him, I feel like getting to the pro level and especially the AHL is going to be so important for him. Once we see what he's made of there, then I think we'll get a better assessment because the WHL is just too easy for him. But now we're going to go on to number 8.
Yeah, that's a pretty accurate read on Matejchuk. His style of game just I don't know how it would translate to the NHL. If it does, that'd be pretty incredible. But the skill is there. You just gotta coach him into playing slightly differently. Just change his game up a little bit to really get him to succeed at the pro level, I think.
And talking about a little bit too easy, let's go on to Jagger Fergus, also from the Moose Jaw Warriors. 80 points in 66 games, dynamic, especially in the second half of this year. The biggest problem to me with Fergus is his physical game. He gets knocked off pucks way too consistently, and he's a player that I think just needs more size to him. Even though he is 5'10", he doesn't play strong enough, I don't think, to really provide and alleviate some of those worries. But at the same time, his hockey sense is brilliant. His shot is just so dynamic, and he's a player that in the offensive zone can cook from anywhere on the ice. He's going to be a great offensive player if those physical traits take that next step. But
Okay, so he actually has Fergus ranked higher than a lot of other people have him ranked, so I will give him credit for that. I do have Fergus ranked even higher than he does, though, so I do kind of disagree him on there a little bit. I just think he has the best shot in the draft, and the physical issues are there. He does get beat off the puck a bit too easily, but I think adding strength and muscle is like I've said this before. I just think that's a relatively easy thing to do. I mean, it depends on like the body type and the player, right? Like some people like for me putting on weight is like extremely difficult for me, but I'm not a pro athlete either. And Furcus, I mean, for most prospects, like that isn't too much of an issue. So if he can just add a little bit of weight, then he could easily become one of the best, if not the best, pure goal scorer in this draft class. So I do have him ranked a bit higher for that reason alone. And his playmaking is no slouch either. Like he could be a really, really dangerous weapon on the power play.
now going on to number 17, and another WHL player. Next up, I have Conor Geeky from the Winnipeg Ice. Now, I would have
Okay, so right away, I mean, I knew this was coming eventually, but having Geeky ranked higher than Furcus to me is like kind of criminal. And I that might sound weird because pretty much everybody has Geeky ranked significantly higher than Furcus, so Gravity is actually a bit closer to how I think on this one. But for me, Geeky's puck skills just aren't that great. He is a pretty good passer, pretty good playmaker, but I do want to see it at higher levels first. And that is the best part of his game, but he gets beat off the puck way too often for a guy of his size, and that really comes down to his skating. His skating is just a major issue for me, and he is often looking down, trying to control the puck because he's not really in control of his body well enough to really do things at a really high speed. And so he'll try to do something and then like lose the puck slightly, and then a much smaller player, or any player really, can it gives them an opportunity to come and steal it from him. And yeah, so general consensus on Geeky is like maybe even a top 10 guy. I don't see that at all. So 17 is a bit closer to where I have him, but I honestly barely have him in my first round, which a lot of people are going to see as a bit of a hot take, but that's just my opinion on Geeky. I'm really not sold on him at all.
A lot higher, but to me, the lack of explosiveness and the lack of clear-cut speed with his skating is a humongous problem for a player that's
Mhm.
going to be primarily used on offense and on transitions. I also do think for a 6'4" player, he doesn't use his size nearly enough, and especially offensively, it feels like he doesn't want to use it at times, which confuses me quite a bit. I do like his puck handling, and his passing is amazing, but I do think he'll need to change his game a lot before he's that really solid and great offensive forward at the next level. Now going on to number 16, going on to the player that I might be highest on the most compared to what most people are at, in Rutger McGroarty. Now, I love Rutger. I absolutely love this player.
Yeah, I have McGroarty at 32.
The only problem that everybody has is his skating. And to me, if he's able to hire a coach that can get him some more explosiveness, it's all over. His shot is beautiful. His physicality is amazing along the boards. Such a monster to play against and such a great power forward. This is a guy that at the center position I think can be so hard to play against, and you combine that with his fantastic puck handling, his amazing decision making. To me, the only weakness is that skating, and if he's able to just get a little bit better and a little bit more explosive, I could see him being a good second line penalty kill player that does almost everything you'd want. But now moving inside the top 15, let's go to another centerman, but a little bit more of an unorthodox one in Marco Kasper. I've kind of been on the fence on him a little bit throughout the course of this year.
That's
Over the
fine.
past couple months, I've been seeing a lot
It's
more
a
of
bit
him that I've
high.
really been liking. First things first, nobody's denying his motor is probably the best of this draft. One of the most consistent and one of the most interesting players along the boards. And one of the best parts about him is if the other team has the puck around him, he's going to find the way to strip it, get the puck back, and still keep that cycle going. Such a good player along the boards, and I think that'll really transition well to the NHL level. I just have a little bit of doubts over where the potential lies. I could see a situation where he maxes out as a good third-line centerman, but I do think there is potential with his physical traits where you could see him be a second-line center. But again, there's a pretty big coin flip over whether that will actually happen or not. Then going on to number 14, talking about potential that could be unlocked. Next up, I have Swedish forward Javan Lekaramaki. Now, to me, there is really one amazing thing about him, and that is, of course, his shot and his shot selection. Even though there is some consistency issues there, I do think most of the time when he is shooting, he has a pretty great eye for where he should be going and where he should be moving. And I do think his skating is good enough to where he does put himself in the positions by himself to get there a lot of the times, but I also do think his physical traits are way behind some of the players in the SHL, and you saw that a little bit when he was playing there. But I do think at the same time, with his passing game being solid and his puck handling being great, if you're able to unlock some of that hockey sense and some of that size, I do think Lekaramaki could be a great power play sniper at the next level.
Yeah, so I don't really like Lekarimaki's shot selection that much, actually. I think that is one of his flaws. He does like to shoot the puck, and he kind of shoots it from everywhere, which is fine for a sniper playing, you know, J20 in Sweden or even in the SHL, but most NHL goalies are a lot tougher to score on. It takes a really special kind of player to just shoot it from anywhere and score consistently, kind of like Patrick Laine, basically. And that is a player that I would kind of compare Lekarimaki to in terms of their style, but I'm not convinced that Lekarimaki has the shot Laine does. So I have him ranked at 14. It's actually, I'm pretty sure, lower than where I have him. So I think that's fine. Like Maki is a guy who might move down my board a little bit as I go into my final rankings. But yeah, don't like his shot selection.
But now, let's go on to number 13 and go on to another winger that's pretty much completely different from Lekaramaki and Conor Geeky. Now, to me, Geeky is a guy that's also risen quite a bit, and for a lot of the right reasons. His motor and defensive game is fantastic, and to me, he's going to be one of the more consistent and overall solid players of this draft class. But I do think his offensive and his efficiency there is really underrated too. His shot is amazing, and to me, that's the most underrated part of his game. If he gets in the right places, he's not going to waste opportunities, and with his passing game and his puck handling being solid too, to me, there's a solid two-way, 40-point guy at the NHL level that does all the right things and is going to be a coach's dream. But now let's talk about another coach's dream here at number 12 and another Swedish forward in Liam Öhgren. Now, to me, Öhgren is going to be having one of the higher floors of this draft class. And although I like his talent, and I especially like his shooting potential, I do think at the same time there is a chance where he maxes out as a bottom six, checking, solid neutral zone player. But at the same time, I think there's a good chance as well where he does become a second line guy that does all the small things and really gets in the details. He's going to be a solid and a fan favorite at the next level.
Okay, so I don't have any problem with Liam Öhgren being ranked this high at all, but it is pretty interesting now that I think about it because I'm pretty sure we haven't seen Noah Östlund on this list at all, and I would not have Östlund ahead of Öhgren for sure. Um, and this is a top 50, so that's quite interesting if Noah Östlund is actually not on this list.
Now going on to number 11, though, and we're going to go to the finish side of things. Next up in winger, Joachim Camel. Now, to me, Camel has kind of been all over the place throughout this year. The biggest problem for me with Camel is, although his shot is amazing, I think his shot selection is rather poor. And for a player that's projected to be this amazing sniper,
I agree with
one
that.
of the best goal scorers of this draft, that is a problem in my opinion. But he also has some really underrated physical traits. To me, he even at 5'9", he really puts in hard work along the boards and does a lot of the time as well like to get pucks back to his team and back to himself along the play. But I do also think, again, his shot selection is rather weak, and I do think in terms of pace, there is still more to be unlocked before he's a great pro player. But now going inside the top 10, next up, we're going to go to Russian defenseman out of Saginaw of the OHL in Pavel Mintyukov, who's quickly risen up my boards for very good reason. One of the best and most efficient offensive players really throughout this entire year. Really playing fantastic for Saginaw, 62 points in 67 games. To me, there's so many high traits that really stand out. His hockey sense is brilliant, and I think his puck handling is among the best of anybody in this draft, let alone defenseman. I think his passing game and his consistency and crispness with passes is also a very underrated part of him, and his shot can be really powerful from the point as well. I do think there is some physical traits that do need work. I think he also, even though at 6'1", can feel a little bit smaller than he needs to, but I do think this is a player that on a top four, on a power play, will be brilliant, and I think will be a great skating and solid fundamental offensive player. But
Okay, so the 10 for Mintyukov for me is not really that far out of left field, but having him 11 spots, if I remember correctly, Korchinski was at 21. Having him 11 spots ahead of Korchinski is a bit much. I have like, geez, Korchinski is my third ranked defenseman in the draft class, so I do believe he's better than Mintyukov. Mintyukov definitely has the offensive upside. I do think his defensive game needs more work than a guy like Korchinski, which is, I'm guessing, is where our main disagreement there, I guess, occurs. But yeah, I certainly wouldn't mind a team swinging on Mintyukov that high in the draft.
But now, going on to number 9, and another player that I'm pretty high on compared to most people, going on to one of the highest European forwards of this draft, in my opinion, in Noah Östlund. Now, to me, Noah Östlund is one of the most dynamic.
Okay, so Noah Östlund is on this list, and he's ahead of Öhgren. That's very interesting.
And maybe the most electrifying forward and player of this draft class. To me, with his raw potential, if you're able to unlock that skill, to me, there is so much to be had, and I think there could be a first-line, dynamic, power play player here. To me, the biggest problem is the consistency issues, as well as the physical traits. He is 5'11", but he plays like he's 5'6". He feels small out there, and especially in the neutral zone, so many attempts to transition play and get in the offensive zone, just get stalled worded because he can't have enough separation, and I feel like that's going to be a really big problem at the next level. But if he's able to manhandle that and get out of the way and get some more muscle on him, to me that puck handling is brilliant, and that brain is amazing too. There's so much there, and I'm desperately hoping that some team picks him up and gets the most out of him. Now,
Yeah, so that is really interesting analysis of Ostland. I don't think it's necessarily inaccurate, but just having him top 10, let alone ahead of Ogren, is uh, very, very interesting. Uh, yeah, I think Ostland is the type of guy who needs the right kind of line mates to really excel. Um, Ogren is more of a guy who's a bit safer. I think could work in a variety of situations. So I don't know. We'll see about this one. Uh, I don't have Ostland in my first round. I don't think. I think I have him just outside my first round right now, but Ogren is in my first round, so pretty interesting.
speaking of getting the most out of, let's go on to number 8 and another fantastic offensive player here in Frank Nazar, who is another dynamic player in this draft class. To me, when it comes to Nazar, there's a lot to like. His motor is fantastic, and his speed is brilliant too. He's going to be a guy that you just cannot keep up with, even if he's placed in the NHL right now today. He's a player, though, that I think also has some ways to go with his physical traits, and I think also has maybe a little bit too much overconfidence, but at the same time, his hockey sense is brilliant. His passing is amazing, and I do think at the next level, he could have one of the best potentials of this draft class if he's able to adapt to that pro game. I don't have many worries with him, but I also think there might be a chance where he completely busts. A little bit of that there. But
Yeah, so I pretty much agree with everything he said there, except for the part where he busts or he could bust. I maybe you never know. Any given player could bust. I mean, first overall players bust sometimes, but I'm not really concerned that that is like a significant possibility with Nazar in particular. I think there's a lot of other guys that he's talked about already that have significantly higher chances of being busts who have somewhat similar upsides. I think Nazar, though, does have one of the highest upsides in this draft class. He's just really, really fast, which is kind of how that's the direction the NHL is going to. Just look at the Colorado Avalanche. Like they're one of, if not the fastest team in the league, and they're one win away from winning the Stanley Cup as I'm recording this. So, uh, yeah, Nazar is really good.
now going on to number 7, and another pretty big boom or bust prospect to me in Matthew Savoy. Now, here's the thing. If I told you right now that Savoy actually is a pretty good defensive forward, would you believe me? Would you believe me? Well,
Yeah, I mean, Savoy isn't that bad defensively, actually. I think a lot of times the results aren't perfect, but he is relatively defensively responsible. He's involved in defensive zone transitions, particularly defensive zone breakouts, um, quite often when he's on the ice. So yeah, I mean he's undersized, but he can play defense.
over the past few months, I've been watching a lot more of him, trying to get a really good grasp on him, and to me, he's a weird player. On paper, 90 points in 65 WHL games, fantastic. I do think there is some promise physically, but at the same time, not as much as I was expecting for a 5'9" player. I do think maybe the biggest problem right now for Savoy is just some of the thinking there. I do think there's some plays that he gets away with where he's not going to get away with at the pro game, especially in the offensive zone where I think there's some risky passes that he doesn't need to make. But I do feel like with the skating that he has, with the shot that he has, and with the overall fundamental abilities, there's a player that has shown to improve in the defensive zone, has shown to be better in transitions than he was before. And although I do think there is some room to improve, there is a great framework there for a top 6 dynamite offensive player.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with everything he said there. I do think his shot is pretty underrated. He did say that he has a good shot, but uh, I think his shot is one trait in particular from him that a lot of people aren't talking about. He is a really good playmaker, which I think overshadows that at time, but he can find the back of the net just as much as anybody, really.
Now going on to number 6, though, and going on to the top defenseman of this class in Czech D-man, David Jiricek. Now, I'm not as high on Jiricek as some others, but I do got to admit the tools and the fundamentals there are fantastic.
Yeah, so Juracek is my top ranked defenseman. Obviously, he's going to have Nemec ahead of him. Um, but yeah, I just think the foundations are really, really strong with him. He has like he's a super safe pick, really. Nemec, I think, is considerably riskier, which is really the main difference between them. And I think Nemec does have a higher ceiling in terms of offense, at least. But in terms of really impacting the game in all three zones, I think Juracek is by far the safest bet of any defenseman in this draft class.
Although I do think he definitely needs to take a step above in defensive IQ and defensive positioning. He does have great physical traits at 6'3". I think there's potential there where if he does unlock the defensive game, he could be a great overall two-way force and kind of be a little bit, I would say, like Devon Toews, though I think a little bit of a lesser skater there. But at the same time, in the top 6, totally deserving of a spot this high. But now going on to number 5 and the defenseman that I just barely have over Jiricek. To me, these two guys are pretty much tied, but at number 5, I have Simone Mesh. Now, to me, Simone Mesh is a really interesting player here who has so much potential to the next level. Although he won't be an amazing defensive defenseman, at the same time, I still think his physical traits are pretty great at 6'1", and he does get around opposing forecheckers pretty well. To me, one of the biggest problems with him is his consistency. Some shifts he'll look absolutely dynamite, weaving around defenders, transitioning beautifully. Others, he'll look at an open play and just dump it down the ice for an icing.
Yeah, so that is my main gripe with Nemec as well, is his consistency, and especially with the icings. I hate unnecessary icings, and Nemec is a guy who just will have a pass available for a breakout or something, and then he'll just ice it instead. It's really annoying, especially, or sometimes he'll be in the defensive zone and the puck will come to his stick and he'll just ice it for, even though like they weren't under heavy pressure or anything. He just ices it instead of attempting to clear the zone, which is really annoying.
To me, there is some decision making that does need to be improved, but I do like his passing game. His skating is brilliant in the right moments. And to me, if you do unlock this player, you could get a type of Morgan Riley, maybe John Klingberg, transitional defenseman who just makes a lot of the right decisions, even if he does make some big gaffes, but does a lot of the right things and pushes play brilliantly. But now going on to number 4, let's go on to one of the most controversial players of this draft, and rightfully so, in Finnish forward Brad Lamberts. Now, a lot of you guys might have reservations.
Okay, I'm not gonna lie, I was starting to get worried Brad Lambert wasn't gonna be on this list.
For pretty good reasons. His decision making can be rather raw, and his physical traits just are not good enough right now. But I also do.
I don't think his decision making is really that big of an issue. I think he's just trying to make plays that are at a higher level than really his line mates can really play to, which I guess is kind of a mistake in terms of decision making, but he really sees plays and attempts to make plays that are at a really high level. So can't, I don't feel good faulting him about that too much. I would love to see him play on a better team in a better situation and see how people start to think about his decision making and his vision in that case.
Think in Finland, his strengths are not getting utilized whatsoever, and he's been on just horrid team after horrid team with horrible luck and terrible teammates around him. He's a player that I would
True.
immediately put in the AHL, put to North America, and get him going there. Because to me, he's the best skater of this draft, the most quick skater of this draft, one of the best puck handlers of this draft, and one of the better passing players of this draft if he's able to unlock that potential. To me, you could have a first-line player on your hands here, and that's worth the bet that you make at number 4.
Yeah, so Lambert absolutely could be a first line player. I do have him ranked slightly lower. I believe I have him at 7 right now. So he has fallen for me. He was at as high as 2 this year. So he has fallen a little bit, but props to Grav for having him so high.
Now going on to number 3, though, let's go on to a much more sure thing in Uri Slafkovsky. Now with Slafkovsky, he's obviously gotten a lot
I
of
have
hype,
met too.
and although I don't think he's worth a top 2 pick, at number 3, I think that's where he should lie. His physical traits are obviously some of the best parts about him along the board, especially in the neutral zone. He uses his physical size so brilliantly throughout all of his game, and although I definitely think there needs to be more explosiveness, there needs to be better edge work with his skating. At the same time, his shot is among the best of his draft, his positioning is brilliant, and his puck handling is amazing, especially in the defensive zone. I think there's a very solid overall two-way sniper on your hands here, and to me, a lot of people have been comparing him to Capo Kakko, a lot of people have been comparing him to Mikko Rantanen, but I think he falls in the middle. I think he's kind of like Vladimir Nichushkin, maybe a little bit better offensively, but I think he's going to be a great play pushing forward that does a lot of the right things.
Yeah, so in terms of players Slavkovsky reminds me of, I do see the Nemec, the Nichushkin comparison. He actually reminds me a little bit of Tomas Hertl. Of course, I'm a Sharks fan, so I'm gonna make comparisons to Sharks players when I can. Um, I don't think he's as skilled as Hertl for sure. Like, I don't know that the upside is quite as high as where Hertl is, but at the same time, I do think Hertl is kind of a bit overrated by a lot of Sharks fans. So I mean, really, if Slavkovsky can be a guy who puts up 25 to 30 goals and 60 points a season, I mean, that's not really that much. That's not really that dissimilar to what Hurdle's production has been in most years. Some years, Hurdle has been closer to a point per game, but just overall, I think Slavkovsky is one of the safest bets in this draft class. I think worst case scenario, you're getting somebody who is going to be like a physical middle six forward who can score. And best case scenario, you're going to be getting maybe a point per game guy who just plays in all situations and is a major contributor to your team.
Now going on to number 2 and the second best prospect of this draft. At number 2, I have USA centerman Logan Cooley. To me, when it comes to Cooley, there's so much to like there. One of the best skating and edge work players of this draft, and you combine that with his brilliant smarts and one of the best passing players of this draft. To me, there's so much to unlock in the offensive zone. Also, one of the best transitional players, in my opinion, of this draft as well, who just can be so efficient with it in so many ways. And even though he is 5'10", I don't think there's much of a worry over him playing at the pro level. He's shown he can get around defenders with ease, and even when he is on one-on-ones, he can still battle along the boards and still get possessions out. To me, there's a player that does a lot of the right things and a lot of the details, but can be very flashy too. And to me, he's a very diverse and versatile forward of this draft. And again, is the only player outside of Shane Wright that I would consider for that first overall pick. But now let's go on.
The only player I would consider first overall instead of Wright is Slavkovsky, but I could see that with Cooley.
On to the number 1 spot. And of course, let's go on to Kingston and let's go on to Shane Wright. Anybody else, though, realistically, that is not going to pick Shane Wright number 1 should not really be thinking about it too much, in my opinion. To me, Shane Wright is the obvious number 1 pick in so many ways. A lot of people are comparing him to Patrice Bergeron. I see him more as a John Tavares if he was much better defensively. To me, what strikes me is his IQ and his positioning. One of the most smart players you'll ever see, and easily the smartest player of this draft. His problem-solving skills are brilliant, and his offensive game can be great too. He's a lot more methodical. He's not going to make these highlight reel plays nearly as often as Slavkovsky or Logan Cooley might, but he's going to be a player that's efficient, is solid, does the right things every single time, and defensively is one of the best forwards of this draft. Might not have as high of a potential as some other big prospects over the past few years, but to me, he's worth a first overall pick and will be a great, consistent, and solid first-line centerman for a long time to come. But that'll be
Okay, yeah, so that's pretty accurate. I think Shane Wright is the safest player in this draft class. Um, one of the if one of the only, if not the only, like bona fide first line players in this draft class. I do see him as a 1C. I would compare him though more to Logan Couture. So again, another Sharks player comparison there. But yeah, a guy who maybe puts up 30 goals, 70 points ish per season, which is very, very respectable and is very solid and responsible on defense, but like not insanely good defensively. Like again, not a Patrice Bergeron. I don't really see that. But Couture is pretty solid defensively. He's pretty responsible, but he's not like, he's not like a third defenseman out there, and contributes a lot offensively. Right, does have a really good shot. He could be a guy who scores more goals than a guy like Logan Couture. He has 40 goal potential, I think, especially if you put him with somebody who's a really good playmaker. But yeah, that is pretty much it for this video, I guess. So if you stuck around this long, headphones off to you, because I'm sure that this video is approaching an hour, if not more than that. It's gonna be a bit of a pain to upload, I'm sure. But if you did stick around this long, thank you so much for watching. If you believed it deserved a like, go ahead and leave it a like. That would be really awesome. That really helps me out. I will leave another video on screen just in case you're a masochist and you want to stick around and watch more of my content for some reason. But yeah, if you don't do that, that's awesome too. And whatever you do, have a great day.